Thanks, Marty, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today in my capacity as the Clinical Director for Ward Medication Management. I have to fess up and say that I'm actually here in another capacity today, and that is as a site familiarisation program. I'm an Adelaide Crows supporter, and I'm expecting to be back here 30th of September. The boys will be out there. Anyway, so look, I'm going to shine a light today into a place that doesn't get illuminated as much as possible, to have a look at what goes on in aged care facilities and how medicines are used in those facilities. So traditionally there's a disclaimer that people put up with these things. So this is my disclaimer. Occasionally somebody's bought me a coffee or left a dodgy biro in my office. Hardly any cute furry animals were harmed in the making of these slides. All right. So, why is it important to make wide choices about the way we use medicines for older people in aged care facilities? Well, first of all, there are a lot of them. That's relatively old data now, but it does tell us that there are, in fact, over 300,000 now people living in aged care around Australia, and they are affected by extensive multimorbidity, polypharmacy, medication-related problems. They have a lot of ways in which they can suffer iatrogenic harm, suboptimal treatment outcomes, and a quality of life that may be less than what they could have if we did it all really well. Since the introduction of residential medication management reviews, RMMRs, in aged care facilities in 1997, there have been literally hundreds of thousands of these things completed. In fact, millions. And it seems to me that it's self-evident that we should be using some of the data from these to support our understanding of the kinds of patterns in the way in which medicines are used in aged care facilities. So how might this data be used? Well, there are a range of ways we might use it, but certainly it can be put to work in the interests of achieving better quality use of medicines, to do things like provide normative feedback to prescribers and to aged care facilities to let them know how they're doing relative to their peers, to identify prescribing patterns, to help us understand patterns of dosage intensity for the drugs that are used in these facilities, to allow us to map to indications, to understand what the medicines are being used for in these facilities, and to tailor educational offerings that we might offer to try and hit the mark where it's needed. So this is what we do to collect data that can be used to support the Choosing Wisely Medicines initiative. So when our pharmacists go into a nursing home or aged care facility and do a medication review, the first thing they do is collect data about all the medications that that person is taking at that time on that day. So that's all medications, whether they're prescribed by the person's GP, their specialist, whether they're recommended by a pharmacy, whether they're complementary or alternative medicines. Everything that's on the chart is recorded. We also collect information about their medical morbidities, so we know what medical conditions are being treated, their clinical investigations, pathology, radiology, imaging, those sorts of things, and demographics, obviously. We have put a lot of money, time, effort and energy into developing extensive IT infrastructure to support all this. We train our people very thoroughly in how to use the work, the software to perform the work, and we are interested in quality assurance and research. So when we get this information, the next thing we do is index it to the anatomic therapeutic classification, the ATC codes, understand the dosage patterns relative to the defined daily doses, and also the ICD-10 codes to characterise the morbidities that we're seeing. So what I'm going to show you today is some information from nearly 25,000 RMMR reports that we've completed over the last 3 years, and we're continuing to grow this database of reports at a rate of about 1,000 a month. So it's a significant accumulation of information. You might be interested to see that's what the dashboard of the software app that we've developed for the purpose of doing these RMMRs looks like. It's very user-friendly. The pharmacists are coached as to how to put the data into it and to make sure that it is understandable and usable. And what it does is to allow us to do things like this. So this is actually a dashboard presentation. So we use business intelligence software to be able to feed back anonymised data to the facilities and to our doctors to to allow them to understand how they're doing. So each of these little coloured dots here represents an individual aged care facility nested within a group of aged care facilities, which is a corporate brand of aged care facilities. And they correspond to those dots there on the map as to where they are located. And you can see here, for example, that for this quarter, we undertook 903 RMMRs for this particular group of aged care facilities. We have submitted a little under 1,800 referrals for consideration by the GP, and they may or may not all be signed off, but that's where the RMMRs are coming from. And we can tell them some gross data about, for example, how they are going relative to their peers. So for this group of aged care facilities, the average number of regular medicines taken by the residents was 8.82, and the average number of PRN medicines was 4.15. That compares to the wider average for all of our beds, all of our 18,000 beds across 5 states, of 9.3 and 4.29. So you can see in this instance, this particular group of aged care facilities was performing better in terms of polypharmacy relative to the others. You can also see down here, and that probably doesn't project very well, but that's the reasons for referral for the RMMR. So the 2 big peaks are a new admission to the facility, and secondly, a routine 2 yearly check. But there are all kinds of other reasons people make referrals. Can be after hospitalisation, after a fall, a new geriatric syndrome that's appeared, symptoms suggestive of an adverse drug reaction, and so forth. Essentially, about 25% of all people in an aged care facility in the cohort that we analysed were being treated with a HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor. We found that, in fact, the majority of these people were being treated with a statin in the absence of a cardiovascular event. So in other words, they hadn't had a heart attack, a stroke or a TIA. So for all intents and purposes, the majority of people in this cohort were being treated with statins for primary prevention. Primary prevention, not secondary prevention. We also found that a large proportion of people in this cohort, and it's a shame the slide doesn't project, but were in the age group of 85 years and older. So what we found was, in fact, extensive use of statins for primary prevention in people 85 years of older. Just out of interest, we found 73 people older than 100 years who were being treated with a primary prevention statin. So I don't know what they were waiting for, but it certainly is unlikely to happen to them. I think it's fair to say. So I'm sorry I couldn't present that data to you, but it is an interesting insight because, of course, these people have the most to lose from being on a statin. They are the people who are on high doses of statin, as you can see from this slide here. This tells us the distribution of the red bar are the people who are being treated at a dosage intensity of less than 1 defined daily dose per day. The sort of bluish coloured bar is the people who are being treated at a dose of 1 defined daily dose per day, and the teal, it pains me to use the word teal, that's the other team in Adelaide, but anyway. The teal bar is the people being treated at greater than 1 defined daily dose per day. So a lot of these people, 80 to 90, or even over 100 years of age, were being treated with high doses of statins for primary prevention. It's not good news, is it? This is another scenario that we had a look at. This is proton pump inhibitors, and I'm glad this slide did come up. So you can see here, out of 25,000 odd reviews that we've done, almost 1 in 2 people were receiving a proton pump inhibitor, 44%. So you can see they're widely used. And we had a look at a couple of little interesting subplots in that data. So one of the things we looked at, you can probably see there, those of you who read the Australian Prescriber will probably recognise that that was published in the last edition, a case report illustrating the potential of these drugs to cause hypomagnesemia. What we did was to look at the people who had been treated with PPIs and who were receiving a magnesium supplement and compare them to the people who were not receiving a magnesium supplement. And what we found was that it was a highly significant association between being treated with a PPI and getting a magnesium supplement. So it's a form of prescription symmetry analysis, if you like. Down the bottom here, we also found that there were 1,200 odd people who'd been prescribed a PPI concurrently with clopidogrel. and of course there is a potential interaction between clopidogrel and the PPIs, or some of the PPIs, that means that it may actually not be able to produce its antiplatelet effect. This is antipsychotics in aged care. About 25% of the people we saw in the reviews were being treated with an antipsychotic. If we look at the number of people who had a diagnosis, a documented diagnosis of a psychotic disorder, and we were pretty broad in what we defined as a diagnosis of a psychotic disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder and bipolar disorder, only 2.2%. So a lot more people were being treated with antipsychotics than would be expected on the basis of the prevalence of psychotic disorders. We were able to see that a lot of these people didn't have a documented diagnosis of a dementia, and certainly there were a lot of people who weren't being treated with a drug used for the management of dementia. I'll finish up, just quickly show you again, this is some of the insight on the business intelligence data that we can offer. So this is distribution of antipsychotics, that's distribution of benzodiazepines, and so forth. So we're really all about trying to connect and be a part of collaborations. This is the latest one we're involved with. This is the Texas Medical Center collaboration, one of 25 companies from around the world selected to be a part of this collaboration for an accelerated program for IT and health. So really we're all about going from the journey, starting with collecting information, using it to assemble knowledge, and eventually to come out the other side with wisdom to inform choosing wisely decisions. Thanks very much for your attention.